In a quiet mountain town buried under snow, a little disabled girl is cast out by her own stepmother, forced to survive with her baby brother on the cold streets. But when a weary police officer and his loyal German shepherd stop their car beneath a flickering street lamp, everything changes. This isn't just a story about rescue. It's about light, forgiveness, and how one act of kindness can rebuild a home, a heart, and a life. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments below. And may your day or night be filled with warmth, hope, and a little bit of light from house number 27. The rain had lingered over Willow Creek, a small mountain town tucked between pines and fog, for 3 days straight. Water slid from tin roofs like tears from an exhausted sky, gathering in the cracks of the cobblestone street. The air was thick with the smell of wet cedar and coal smoke, and the lamps along the avenue burned faintly through the mist, soft halos trembling against the dark. Somewhere down the slope, near the end of Maple Hollow Road, a single flickering streetlight buzzed and sighed as though struggling to stay alive. Beneath that weary glow, a little girl sat on the edge of a wooden porch, her crutch leaning against her shoulder. Lila Carter, 10 years old, had the delicate look of a child who had grown up too fast. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, clung to her temples in damp strands. Her right leg was thin and frail, encased in a metal brace that glimmered faintly each time the light swung overhead. The injury had come years ago, a car accident that took her father's life and left her half-crippled ever since. But her face, pale and watchful, carried a strength that no wound could erase. Beneath her quiet eyes lived the soul of someone who had learned to endure before she ever learned to dream. Inside the small, decaying house behind her, the muffled sound of porcelain cups clinking against the table broke the silence. Sarah Whitmore, her stepmother, emerged from the doorway. She was a tall, angular woman in her 40s, her blonde hair tied too tightly, pulling her features into something sharp and joyless. Her beauty had faded early, worn away by bitterness and the ghost of disappointment. Once she had been a waitress at the diner downtown, smiling, talkative, full of easy laughter, until the man who married her, Lila's father, died in that same accident. The insurance money ran out, the debts piled up, and the kindness in her face turned to stone. Now she lived as if the world owed her restitution. Her pale blue eyes darted constantly, suspicious of everyone, even the children under her roof. "You're still sitting?" she barked, voice cutting through the rain. "Get up! The morning crowd's already out." Lila rose slowly, adjusting the strap of the worn cloth pouch slung across her chest. Inside were folded sheets of lottery tickets, the edges curled and damp. Behind her, a small boy appeared in the doorway, clutching a piece of bread. Noah, her little brother, was 6, all wide brown eyes and tangled hair. His cheeks were hollow, but his smile, when it came, could still chase the gray out of a day. He was too young to understand cruelty in its true form, though he saw it daily. "Don't forget to thank your aunt," Lila whispered to him. He nodded, swallowing the bread quickly. Sarah didn't notice. She stood at the doorway with one hand on her hip and the other holding a cigarette, her lips pressed tight. "You sell every one of those tickets before dusk," she said. "No excuses. People like you don't get things handed to them. You work or you starve." It wasn't a lesson. It was punishment wrapped in philosophy. Lila only nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah turned back into the house, muttering something about bills and wasted mouths. The door slammed shut, rattling the loose window frames. Lila and Noah stepped out into the rain. The street was nearly empty, except for a few shopkeepers sweeping puddles away from their doorways. The bakery's sign creaked in the wind. The smell of yeast and cinnamon drifted faintly down the road, a cruel reminder of hunger. They walked slowly, Lila's limp making each step uneven, her crutch clicking against the wet pavement. Every now and then, she stopped to straighten the ticket stack in her pouch. Noah trailed behind, humming softly, his small hands cupped around the coins they had from the previous day. "Maybe we'll sell all of them today," he said. "Then we can buy pastries." Lila smiled faintly. Maybe. But hour after hour passed, and no one stopped. Some looked at her brace and pitied her. Others turned away, pretending not to see. By noon, her fingers were stiff from the cold, and Noah's lips trembled as he held the last 2 tickets up to a passing couple. The woman smiled politely, but the man tugged her arm, leading her away. When they reached the edge of Willow Street, the rain began again, thin needles of silver stitching the air. Lila guided Noah beneath an old awning in front of a shuttered shop. She emptied her pouch on her lap. Only a few coins clinked against the fabric. "Enough for bread," she murmured. Noah brightened. "I'll go." He dashed through the drizzle toward the corner stall, bought a small loaf, and hurried back. Tearing it in half, he handed the larger piece to her. "You eat it," Lila said. "You too," he insisted. He pressed the bread into her hands, and she took it, though she barely tasted the bite. They stayed like that until the light began to fade. The rain turned to mist, and the town seemed to disappear into its own breath. Lila stared at the horizon, where the hills were swallowed by cloud, and wondered if their father could see them from wherever he was. When they returned home, the sky was already dark. Water dripped steadily from the porch roof as Sarah waited by the doorway, a cup of tea steaming in her hand. "Is that all you made?" she asked when Lila placed the coins on the table. "Yes, ma'am," Lila said softly. People weren't buying. It rained again. The cup slammed against the table so hard the handle cracked. The liquid spilled, hissing as it met the cold wood. "Don't give me excuses," Sarah snapped. "Do you think food appears out of thin air? Do you think I can feed you with pity?" Her voice rose with every word, echoing through the small house like thunder. Noah flinched. Lila tried to reach for him, but the back of Sarah's hand came down first. Sharp, sudden, ringing. The blow sent Lila stumbling into the wall, her crutch clattering to the floor. Noah darted forward to help her, but Sarah kicked him away. "Get out!" she shouted. "Get out of my house! Both of you!" Lila blinked through tears, her cheek burning. "Please," she whispered. "We'll do better tomorrow." "I said out!" Sarah roared, her eyes wild. "You're nothing but dead weight." She grabbed the pouch of tickets and tore it open, scattering them across the floor. The flimsy paper fluttered like frightened birds. Coins rolled under the furniture. Then came the sound of the lock twisting, final and cold. The rain greeted them again as they stepped outside. Lila pulled Noah close, her thin jacket soaked through almost instantly. The streetlight above flickered, on, off, on again, painting them in uneven gold. For a moment, they just stood there, shivering, not knowing where to go. Then Lila took Noah's hand. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's walk." They moved down the street, past shuttered shops and puddles reflecting the faint orange of the lamps. Lila's limp slowed them, each step a small battle between pain and resolve. Noah clung to her arm, his head resting against her side. Behind them, the windows of their old house dimmed and vanished. Ahead, the road stretched toward the bridge that led out of town, and there, parked just beyond the light's edge, was a police cruiser. Inside sat Officer Daniel Harper, 38, with the calm posture of someone used to chaos but tired of it. His uniform was dark blue, the badge dulled by years of rain. His hair, once black, was now streaked with gray at the temples, and his face, square-jawed, lined, carried a quiet weariness. He had seen too much. The accidents that left more silence than sound, the calls that came too late. Yet there was a gentleness in his eyes that refused to die, no matter how many long nights he'd faced. Beside him, Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd, lay curled on the passenger seat. His coat was a mix of sable and tan, his muzzle dusted with gray. His eyes were bright, alert, the eyes of an animal who had served long and faithfully. Ranger had been Daniel's partner for years, surviving gunfire, blizzards, and even a near-fatal stab wound that left a thin scar beneath his fur. He was more than a K9. He was Daniel's last family. The windshield wipers squeaked lazily across the glass as Daniel watched the 2 small figures stumbling under the lamp. The girl's limp caught his attention first, then the way she clutched the boy to her chest like a shield. He exhaled, his breath fogging the glass. "Ranger," he said quietly. "You see that?" The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. A low whine escaped him. Daniel hesitated. He'd seen too many runaways, too many cases that began with sympathy and ended in paperwork. But Ranger's eyes met his, steady and knowing. "All right," Daniel muttered, turning off the engine. The headlights dimmed, the rain eased, and as he stepped out into the cold, the flickering streetlight above them steadied, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He approached slowly, careful not to startle them. The girl turned, her face pale in the light, the metal brace on her leg gleaming faintly. "It's all right," Daniel said gently. "I'm Officer Harper. You don't have to be afraid." The boy hid behind his sister. Ranger trotted forward, stopping a few feet away, tail low, body relaxed. He gave a soft bark, not a warning, but a greeting. Lila's eyes widened. He's beautiful." Daniel glanced down at his partner and smiled faintly. "Yeah? He's the good one between us." The girl hesitated, then crouched slightly, her fingers trembling as she reached out. Ranger stepped closer, sniffed her hand, and licked her knuckles. The gesture broke something inside her. The barrier of fear, the belief that the world had no more kindness left. Daniel watched quietly. Somewhere deep in his chest, a familiar ache stirred, the kind that whispered of the second chances. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's get you both somewhere warm." The girl nodded, the boy followed. The rain began again, soft as forgiveness. And under the flickering light of Willow Street, 3 souls, a broken girl, a weary cop, and a loyal dog, took their first step into one another's story. The next morning in Willow Creek dawned with a thin layer of mist that clung to the rooftops like the remnants of an unspoken sorrow. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, fine as breath, but the air still carried the metallic scent of wet earth. The town, with its narrow alleys and tired storefronts, seemed half asleep. The kind of morning when even the sparrows forgot their songs. Officer Daniel Harper stood beside his cruiser, parked under the same flickering street lamp from the night before, one hand resting on the open door, the other on his belt. His uniform, still damp from the night's rain, clung slightly to his shoulders. His expression was thoughtful, almost reluctant, as he watched the 2 children huddled inside the back seat. Lila sat upright, both hands folded neatly on her lap, while her little brother Noah was curled beside her, his face flushed and damp with fever. Ranger sat by Daniel's leg, silent, gaze fixed on the pair. Daniel wasn't a man prone to impulse. For 17 years, he'd served Willow Creek's small but overworked police department, handling everything from domestic disputes to lost hikers. He'd seen what good intentions could cost a man. But when he'd found the children last night, Lila clutching her brother as if shielding him from the rain itself, something old inside him had stirred, something he'd buried years ago after his wife, Eleanor, had passed away from cancer. She had been gentle, all heart and laughter, the type who left kindness behind like perfume. Her loss had carved the warmth out of him, leaving a quiet shell who worked long nights to avoid returning home to the silence. Yet here, in the weary light of morning, that old warmth flickered again. He knelt by the car door. "You're safe now," he said softly. "We'll get your brother checked out." Lila nodded. Her lips were pale, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. "He's just tired," she murmured. "He'll get better." "We'll make sure of that," Daniel replied, closing the door gently. The hospital was only a few miles away, a 2-story brick building that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed like restless bees. A middle-aged nurse met them at the entrance. Her name tag read Patricia Rowe. She had warm brown skin, curly hair pulled into a bun, and a no-nonsense tone that could hush even the most stubborn patients. Yet her eyes softened the moment she saw the children. "Oh, those poor babies," she said, ushering them in. "Come now, let's get him settled." Daniel helped carry Noah to a narrow bed in the children's ward while Lila followed, clutching her crutch tightly. Patricia examined Noah, her hands steady but gentle. "He's burning up," she said. "We'll need to keep him overnight for observation." Lila's voice trembled. "Can I stay?" "Of course, sweetheart," the nurse said. Then she looked up at Daniel. "You're the one who found them?" "Yes, ma'am. Officer Daniel Harper, Willow Creek PD." Patricia studied him a moment, his tired eyes, his soaked jacket, the faint trace of worry still etched into his features. "Well, Officer Harper," she said, "you did the right thing." Daniel only nodded. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man holding a candle in the dark, hoping it wouldn't go out. While the doctors treated Noah, Daniel filled out the necessary paperwork. The hospital's administrator, Dr. Henry Mallory, soon appeared. A tall man in his 50s with thin gray hair and an expression that combined kindness with an almost obsessive need for order. He was polite but formal, the type who preferred protocol to sentiment. "Officer Harper," he began, "you understand that without a guardian or identification, these children are technically wards of the state. We'll need to notify Child Services." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Just give them a little time. They've been through enough already." Mallory's brow furrowed. "We all want what's best, officer, but procedure exists for a reason." Before Daniel could answer, a soft bark drew their attention. Ranger sat by the doorway, tail brushing the floor. He had followed Daniel inside despite the "no animals" sign posted on the wall. Patricia chuckled. "He doesn't seem the type to take orders, huh?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Not when he thinks someone needs guarding." Ranger padded toward Lila's bed and settled beside her. The girl reached down, running her fingers through his fur, her small hand trembling but sure. For the first time since dawn, she smiled. It wasn't the smile of a child. It was something older, fragile, grateful. Hours passed. Rain streaked down the tall windows while the hallway lights flickered in rhythmic pulses. Daniel remained in the waiting area, filling his report on a clipboard. Though his eyes drifted constantly toward the door of the children's ward, he wasn't the only one watching. From across the room, a younger officer named Calvin Brooks leaned against the vending machine, sipping stale coffee. Brooks was 25, sharp-featured with restless energy and a perpetual smirk that made him seem less serious than he was. "You really know how to pick your cases, Harper," he said quietly, walking over. "You bring in 2 kids with no papers, no guardian, and one of them sick as a ghost. Chief's not gonna like this." Daniel didn't look up. "I didn't do it for the chief." Brooks shrugged. "Yeah, but the chief thinks you're still playing hero after hours, and you know how that turned out last time." The memory landed hard. 2 years ago, Daniel had responded to a domestic call gone wrong. A boy had been hurt. His father arrested. The case had spiraled into a media storm that left Daniel publicly criticized for emotional overreach. It had nearly cost him his badge. He met Brooks's gaze. "You'd rather I'd left them on the street?" Brooks sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "No, man. I just don't want you dragged through the mud again. You know how small-town gossip spreads." He was right about that. In Willow Creek, rumors move faster than the river current, and far more destructively. Still, Daniel couldn't regret what he'd done. Some things demanded risk. By nightfall, Noah's fever broke. Patricia emerged from the room with a tired smile. "He's stable," she said. "Rest and fluids will do the trick." Daniel exhaled, shoulders easing for the first time all day. "Thank you." Lila was still awake when he entered the room. The dim bedside lamp cast soft shadows across her face. Ranger was curled at her feet like a guardian statue. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "He's strong," Daniel said. "So are you." She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her blanket. "I'm not," she whispered. "Not really. My leg, it slows me down." Daniel crouched beside her bed. "That brace on your leg doesn't make you weak, Lila. It means you've been through something and you kept going. That's strength." For a moment, silence filled the room. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the hills. Ranger lifted his head, listening. A nurse entered then, holding a clipboard. "Officer Harper, there's a call for you at the front desk," she said. When he left, the hallway lights seemed harsher. Behind the counter, a receptionist handed him the phone. "It's the chief." The voice on the other end was low and stern. "Harper, you've stirred up something. Word's out that you picked up 2 kids last night without immediate report to social services. We've got a journalist asking questions already." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Sir, I don't care what noble reason you had," the chief interrupted. "You know the rules. I want a statement on my desk by morning." The line clicked dead. Daniel set the receiver down slowly. Through the glass door, he could see the drizzle starting again, catching the yellow of the parking lights. Ranger padded up beside him, nudging his leg softly as if to say, "You did the right thing." He rested a hand on the dog's head. "Yeah," he murmured, but the right thing always comes with a price. Back inside, Lila had dozed off, one arm draped protectively over Noah. The light from the bedside lamp haloed her hair in soft gold. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir inside him, a fragile, unfamiliar sense of purpose. He knew this was only the beginning. Outside the window, the same street lamp from the night before flickered once and then steadied, its light spilling across the hospital's wet driveway. Unwavering this time, as if refusing to go dark again. The morning after the storm, the clouds lifted slowly over Willow Creek, revealing a pale wash of gold that filtered through the pine trees. The air was cold, sharp enough to make breath visible, and the streets glistened with the last remnants of rain. Inside, Willow Creek General Hospital, a fragile quiet hung between the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the muted squeak of nurses' shoes. Officer Daniel Harper stood by the wide window at the end of the children's ward, watching mist roll off the hills beyond town. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, tired eyes, lines etched deep from too many nights without sleep. Ranger lay curled at his feet, his thick coat gleaming under the sterile light. The dog's ears flicked with every sound, but his head remained low, as if he understood that silence here meant safety. Daniel turned when he heard small footsteps. Lila approached, her metal brace tapping faintly against the tile floor. She wore a hospital gown, several sizes too big, the sleeves rolled up awkwardly. Her thin frame made her look even smaller than she was, but her gaze, clear and steady, was that of someone who had learned to face storms. "Noah's still asleep," she said quietly. "They said his fever's down." "That's good," Daniel replied. "He's stronger than he looks." "So are you," she murmured. He smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You giving out compliments now?" She shrugged. "You saved us. People don't usually stop." Daniel wanted to say that stopping didn't make someone a hero, it just made them human, but he let the moment linger. From the hallway, the smell of fresh coffee drifted in. Patricia Rowe, the nurse with kind eyes and a voice both firm and gentle, entered the ward. Her uniform was crisp, her stethoscope hanging around her neck like an old friend. "Morning, officer," she said, offering Daniel a steaming cup. "You look like you've wrestled the night shift and lost." "I think I did," he replied, accepting it. Patricia turned to Lila. "Your brother's responding well. He'll need a few more days of rest, but he's out of danger." Lila smiled, relief softening the tension in her shoulders. "Thank you, ma'am." The nurse brushed a hand over the girl's hair, motherly but not intrusive. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Just focus on healing that leg too." Daniel watched the exchange and felt an ache deep in his chest, an ache that had the texture of memory. Eleanor had once spoken to children the same way, tender but steady, never pitying. He could almost hear her laughter echoing faintly through the sterile walls. When Patricia left, Daniel crouched down beside Ranger and scratched behind his ears. The dog tilted his head, eyes half-lidded in pleasure. "You like her too, huh?" Daniel murmured. Ranger wagged his tail once, then rested his muzzle on his paws. The moment was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. A young man in a brown trench coat approached from the corridor, camera dangling from his neck. His name tag read, Eli Tanner, a local journalist from the Willow Creek Chronicle. He was in his early 30s, wiry and tall, with dark hair perpetually mussed and eyes that burned with curiosity more than malice. "Officer Harper," he called out, flashing a quick smile that was more habit than warmth. "Got a moment?" Daniel frowned. "You shouldn't be here without clearance." "Relax," Eli said, flipping open a small notebook. "Just doing my job. Word spreading that you brought in 2 homeless kids last night without alerting child services. Folks are curious. Some are saying you're trying to make the department look good after—" Daniel's expression hardened. "After what?" Eli hesitated, lowering his voice. "After last year's incident with the Larson family. The one that got messy." Daniel stepped forward, tone even but cold. "If you came here looking for scandal, you'll be disappointed. Those kids needed help. That's all." Eli studied him for a moment, perhaps realizing he'd gone too far. "Look, I'm not here to attack you," he said, "but people will talk whether I write it or not. If I'm going to print something, I'd rather get your side." You can quote this, Daniel replied. 2 children were left in the rain, 1 near death. I did my job. That's the only story that matters. Eli nodded slowly, scribbling in his notebook. Fair enough. He gave a short wave to Lila before leaving, muttering something about deadlines and small-town rumor mills. When he was gone, Lila tilted her head. Was he mean to you? Daniel chuckled softly. No, just a man who talks too much. Later that afternoon, the hospital's cafeteria buzzed with low conversation. Patricia joined Daniel for lunch, her tray a mix of salad and black coffee. So, she began stirring her cup. What's next for them? Daniel glanced toward the glass wall, where he could see Lila pushing Noah's wheelchair, slowly down the hall, Ranger padding beside them. Child Services will probably step in soon, he said. They'll send a rep from Billings to evaluate. Patricia's brow furrowed. You sound like that's a bad thing. It's not, he said. It's just, the system doesn't always look at people. It looks at paperwork. She gave him a long, quiet look. Maybe you're projecting a bit, officer. He smiled faintly. Maybe I am. Outside, snow began to fall. Not the violent kind, but slow, tentative flakes that drifted past the windows like feathers. Ranger pressed his nose against the glass, fascinated. Lila giggled softly, a sound so rare it startled even her brother. That evening, a representative from Child Services arrived. Margaret Lacey, AZU's woman in her late 40s, carried herself with the precise posture of someone who measured kindness in minutes. She was neat, professional, her gray coat buttoned up to her throat, a tablet clutched in one gloved hand. Her eyes, pale hazel, flickered with practiced sympathy. Officer Harper, she said after introductions, thank you for your intervention. I've reviewed preliminary notes. We'll be transferring the children to state care by Friday. Daniel felt the words hit like a weight. They just got here, he said. The boy's still weak. Margaret's smile was efficient but not unkind. We have facilities better equipped for long-term support. I'll handle the paperwork. When she left, Daniel stood in the corridor a long time, watching the snow swirl outside. Ranger pressed his head against his knee, sensing his unrest. By nightfall, the hospital dimmed to its usual stillness. Lila sat awake, gazing through the narrow window of her room. The snow glowed faintly under the street lamp outside, the same lamp where Daniel had first found them. The image replayed in her mind again and again. The dark car, the rain, the man who didn't drive away. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone. I don't want to leave. Daniel, standing in the doorway, heard her. He stepped closer, keeping his voice low. You won't, not until your brother's better. She turned, eyes glistening in the dim light. I mean, after that. I don't want to go somewhere else. He had no easy answer. The law didn't bend for emotion, yet something in her tone, quiet, certain, made him want to fight the rules anyway. Ranger rose, padded forward, and placed his head gently in her lap. She smiled faintly, fingers curling into his fur. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing Willow Creek in a hush so complete it felt like the world had stopped to listen. Inside, under the dim hospital lights, 3 souls found a moment of fragile peace, temporary, uncertain, but real. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to believe that kindness could be its own kind of shelter. The snow fell heavier that week, muffling the sounds of Willow Creek under a thick white hush. Cars passed slower on the streets, and the faint hum of heaters filled every shop and home. Yet inside the police station, warmth felt like a foreign luxury. Officer Daniel Harper stood in front of Chief Randall's desk, a thin sheet of reprimand paper between them. The chief, a large man in his early 60s with a thick mustache and weary eyes, leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the wooden surface. His uniform fit a little too tightly around his waist, and the silver badge on his chest caught the light like a mirror Daniel didn't want to look into. I'm not saying you did wrong, Chief Randall began, his voice gravelly with both age and frustration. But you know how this looks. You bring in 2 kids off the street, don't log it until hours later, and now half the town thinks you're pulling another stunt to clean your image. Daniel's jaw tightened. You know me better than that, Chief. Randall sighed, rubbing his forehead. I do, but perception matters more than truth these days. Ever since that Larson case, people are watching you. And now that reporter, Tanner, he's been asking for a comment every hour, says he has sources. Sources, Daniel repeated bitterly, meaning gossip and half-truths. The chief gave him a look that carried both sympathy and warning. Do yourself a favor, Harper. Don't talk to him again. Let this storm pass. Keep your head down. Daniel's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. He thought of the hospital, of Lila reading picture books aloud to Noah while Ranger lay beneath the window. I can't. Those kids don't have anyone else. Randall leaned forward, his tone softening slightly. That's exactly the problem. You care too much. In this job, that'll eat you alive. But Daniel was already leaving. Outside, the wind stung his face as he walked toward his cruiser. He started the engine, the tires crunching over snow. The police radio murmured quietly, dispatchers' voices blending into static. Through the windshield, the town looked the same as it always did, quiet, small, self-contained. But Daniel knew it was changing. Whispers traveled faster than snowflakes here. At the hospital, Patricia greeted him with her usual mixture of humor and sharpness. "Morning, Officer Trouble," she said, folding her arms. Her curly hair had escaped its bun again, haloing her face like a storm cloud. "You've made the news." Daniel frowned. "What?" She pointed at the small television mounted near the reception desk. On the screen, the local morning show played a short segment. Police officer under scrutiny after taking in homeless children. They showed footage of him helping Lila out of the cruiser, grainy, distant, filmed through snow. The host's voice was smooth but edged with speculation. Sources claim Officer Harper failed to follow proper procedure, raising concerns about the children's safety. Daniel's stomach dropped. Ranger, sensing the shift in his mood, growled softly. Patricia muted the TV. "You should talk to them. Set the record straight." He shook his head. "No, talking will just feed it." "Well, silence makes people invent stories," she countered. Before he could respond, Margaret Lacey appeared from the hallway, her gray coat buttoned tight, her expression unreadable. "Officer Harper," she said briskly, "I assume you've seen the broadcast." "I have." "Then you understand why my department's concerned. Public trust is delicate. If people start believing you acted improperly," Daniel cut in. "You mean, if they believe I cared?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "This isn't about feelings. It's about process. Until this is resolved, Child Services will take custody by tomorrow." Lila had been listening from the corner of the hall, holding a small cup of water for Noah. Her hands trembled, the plastic cup bending slightly under her fingers. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "We have to leave?" Margaret turned, her voice soft but firm. "It's temporary, dear, just until things are sorted out." The girl didn't answer. Her eyes went to Daniel, full of something between fear and betrayal. Later, as evening fell, Daniel sat alone in the hospital parking lot, the radio silent. Snow gathered on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear. He thought of calling the chief, of pleading for time, but he knew the response he'd get: let it go. But he couldn't. He'd seen too many cases where letting go meant another file closed, another child forgotten. The sound of footsteps on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Eli Tanner approached, hands shoved into his coat pockets, breath fogging in the cold. "Didn't mean to sneak up," he said. "You weren't picking up your phone." "I'm not in the mood for interviews," Daniel muttered. Eli shook his head. "This isn't for the paper? Off record?" He hesitated, his voice lowering. "Someone's feeding the press stories that aren't adding up. Word is, the kid's stepmother's alive and claiming you took them without consent." Daniel stared. "Sarah Whitmore? That's the name on the record. Says you broke into her property and stole her niece and nephew." He clenched his fists. "That woman threw them out in the snow." "I believe you," Eli said. "But she's got documents, signed ones apparently, saying she's their legal guardian. And in a town like this, paperwork beats truth." Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to think. "You said this isn't for print. Why tell me?" Eli's smirk faded. "Because I don't like being used, Harper. Someone's spinning this for a bigger story, and I want to know who." Before Daniel could reply, a figure appeared behind Eli. Patricia, her scarf pulled tight, her eyes sharp. "Officer," she said, glancing between the two men, "Lila's asking for you." Inside, the children's ward glowed in warm lamplight. Lila sat beside her brother's bed, a crumpled piece of paper in her lap. When Daniel entered, she looked up, eyes rimmed with red. "She said we'll be leaving tomorrow," she whispered. "That lady, Margaret, she said they'll take us to a place with other kids. Is it far?" "Not too far," Daniel said gently, though the words burned his throat. "It's just for a while." She looked down at the paper again. "I drew this for you and Ranger." She handed it to him, a child's drawing of a man, a dog, and two children standing under a single streetlight. At the bottom, in uneven letters, she had written, "The night someone stopped." He swallowed hard. "Thank you, Lila. Will we see you again?" He hesitated. "I'll do everything I can." When he stepped out, Ranger followed at his heel. The corridor was empty now, the hum of machines the only sound. Patricia met him at the doorway, her expression grave. "You can't fight every storm, Harper." "I'm not fighting it," he said quietly. "Just not running from it either." Later that night, Daniel drove through Willow Creek, headlights carving through the fog. The town looked different now, colder, judgmental, people behind curtains watching, whispering. He pulled over near the diner, the one where Eleanor used to work. Through the window, he saw Margaret seated with another woman, short, severe-looking, her smile too perfect to be kind. Sarah Whitmore. Her once pretty face was painted with careful makeup, the kind that couldn't quite hide cruelty. She laughed at something Margaret said, her hand resting over the table as if sealing a deal. Daniel's stomach churned. Ranger barked softly from the back seat, as if sensing the tension. "I see her," Daniel said under his breath. "I see exactly what she's doing." The next morning would come soon enough, and with it, the separation he dreaded. But for now, he sat in silence beneath the same flickering streetlight where everything had begun, wondering how truth could lose so easily to the noise of lies. The next morning broke gray and bitter, the kind of morning that made the town of Willow Creek seem older than it was. The snow from the night before had hardened into ice, cracking under boots and tires, and the sky hung low and heavy with unspoken promises of another storm. Officer Daniel Harper stood in the hospital hallway, coffee cooling in his hand, waiting for the moment he dreaded most. Down the corridor, Margaret Lacey and two state transport officers were signing papers near the reception desk. Their breath fogged faintly as the front doors let in a cold draft every time someone entered. The walls hummed with the low fluorescent light, sterile and indifferent. Inside the children's room, Lila sat on the edge of the bed, her small fingers clutching the strap of her satchel. She had dressed carefully that morning, wearing the only decent sweater she owned, a faded red one that was a size too big, and brushed her hair straight, though a few strands still curled rebelliously at her temples. Her eyes were clear, but tired, as if she'd spent the night rehearsing courage. Noah sat beside her, the color back in his cheeks, his small hands playing with the corner of Ranger's leash. Ranger himself lay on the floor beside them, head on his paws, tail tapping faintly whenever either child moved. Daniel entered quietly. Lila looked up at him, and for a moment, neither spoke. It was the silence that came before breaking things. "Is it time?" she asked finally, her voice small. Daniel nodded. "They're here." She swallowed hard. "Will we go far?" "Just to Billings," he said gently. "A few hours away." Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking. He looked at Daniel, then at the door, sensing the shift, the pull of separation that animals feel long before humans speak it aloud. Patricia entered the room then, her coat half-buttoned, her eyes sharp with the kind of sympathy that carried weight. "You two ready?" she asked softly, though her tone betrayed her dislike for the whole process. She had never been good at hiding her heart. Lila gave a tiny nod. Margaret appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. Her professional calm remained intact, but her face was drawn tighter than usual, as if she too disliked what she was about to do, but had long learned how to smother discomfort under rules. "Officer Harper," she said, "thank you for your cooperation. We'll take it from here." Daniel straightened. "I'll help them to the car." Margaret hesitated but nodded. Outside, the sky had begun to spit flakes again. Lila limped carefully through the snow, her crutch clicking against the frozen pavement, while Noah clung to her coat. Ranger walked beside them, matching her pace. Daniel opened the car door and helped them in. "Will you visit us?" Noah asked through the window, his small face pressed to the glass. "I'll try," Daniel said. But when the car drove off, leaving 2 trails in the snow, Ranger barked sharply, once, twice, then whimpered, watching the vehicle vanish into the gray. Daniel stood motionless for a long time, hand resting on the dog's head, until the sound of the engine was swallowed by the wind. That evening, Daniel's small house felt emptier than ever. The photos on the mantel, Eleanor smiling by the lake, his younger self in uniform, seemed like relics from another life. Ranger lay by the door, refusing his food. Daniel poured himself coffee, though it had no taste, and sat by the window. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one, but he couldn't shake the image of the red sweater fading into the snow. He almost didn't hear the knock. It was faint, hurried. When he opened the door, Eli Tanner stood there, shoulders dusted with snow, his notebook tucked under one arm. His face was flushed from the cold. "You won't believe this," Eli said, stepping inside uninvited. "Sarah Whitmore's already making her move." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "She filed a complaint with the county office this morning, accusing you of unlawful conduct, saying you kidnapped her niece and nephew. She's been feeding statements to 3 news outlets. And get this, she hired a lawyer from Helena." Daniel set down his mug, jaw tightening. "She's twisting everything." Eli nodded grimly. "And she's good at it. She's charming the press, telling them she's a grieving aunt, abandoned by a corrupt police system. I've seen her type before. People like her don't just lie. They sell their lies. Can you prove any of it?" "Working on it," Eli said, pacing the room. "I found out she's behind on property taxes and owes money to a loan shark out in Great Falls. That's motive. But I'll need someone to testify she threw those kids out." Daniel sank into a chair. "Lila could tell them." "She's gone, Harper. They'll keep her under state protection until the hearing. You can't just walk into Billings and ask for her." "Then I'll go through legal channels." Eli studied him, half smiling. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? Take on a system that already decided you're wrong?" Daniel glanced toward Ranger, who was watching them quietly. "Some things are worth fighting for." By the next day, the story had spread like wildfire. Local radio stations replayed Sarah's interviews, and the Chronicle's morning edition carried her photo on the front page. "Grieving aunt speaks out against police misconduct." Daniel's phone rang nonstop, some calls from friends offering cautious support, others from strangers spitting anger. Even the chief left a terse voicemail. "Stay home, Harper. You're on leave until further notice." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He drove through town with Ranger in the passenger seat, headlights cutting through the falling snow. Every window he passed seemed to hold shadows watching him. He ended up at the old train bridge on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a place he used to visit with Eleanor when life had felt simpler. The river below was frozen, moonlight glinting off its surface like fractured glass. He stepped out, the cold biting his face, and leaned against the railing. "What am I doing, El?" he muttered. "Trying to fix something that's already broken?" Ranger whined softly and nudged his hand. Daniel smiled faintly, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Yeah, I know. You don't let go either." Meanwhile, miles away in Billings, Lila lay awake in a shared dormitory at the Children's Center. The room smelled faintly of detergent and pine soap. Dozens of small beds lined the walls, each with a thin blanket and a number tag. Noah was already asleep beside her, clutching his toy car. But Lila couldn't rest. The faces of strangers around her made her chest tighten. The only thing she could think of was Daniel's voice, steady, warm, and certain, and Ranger's bark fading into the distance. She sat up and reached into her satchel. Inside was a folded piece of paper she hadn't shown anyone. It was the drawing she'd given Daniel, but she'd made a copy, tracing it carefully with the stub of a pencil. She unfolded it now, looking at the words. "The night someone stopped." Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to cry. She'd promised herself she'd never cry again. But the tears came anyway. The next morning, she made a decision. She slipped quietly from bed, pulled on her boots and limped toward the hallway. A staff member noticed her and stopped her gently. The woman was tall, kind-eyed, maybe in her 30s, with a lanyard that read, Rebecca Hayes. "Sweetheart, you can't be out of bed yet. Are you all right?" Lila hesitated, then looked up. "I need to talk to someone, about Officer Harper." Rebecca's expression softened. "You can tell me." "No," Lila said firmly. "I need to talk to the police." Rebecca crouched down, lowering her voice. "Are you sure, honey? It's early." Lila nodded. "Please, I have to." Rebecca studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, let me make a call." By noon, Daniel's phone buzzed with an unknown number. When he answered, a woman's calm voice said, "Officer Harper? This is Rebecca Hayes from the Billings Children's Center. A girl named Lila Carter wants to speak to you." Daniel froze. "She's okay?" "She's fine, but she's insisting she needs to make a statement, something about clearing your name." For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he said quietly, "Tell her I'm coming." Outside, the snow had stopped. The clouds parted just enough for sunlight to touch the frozen rooftops of Willow Creek. It was faint and brief, but it was a light, and that was enough to begin again. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning, the sky outside a restless gray that promised snow by afternoon. The courthouse stood at the heart of Billings, an old sandstone building whose tall columns and iron doors seemed to carry the weight of every story that had ever passed through them. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and paper, the kind of air that belonged to rooms where truth was supposed to matter. Officer Daniel Harper sat alone at the far end of the hallway outside courtroom 3, his hands clasped tightly together. He hadn't worn his uniform. Chief Randall had advised against it. But even in a plain gray coat and dark slacks, he carried himself like a man still bound by duty. Ranger lay beside his chair, head between his paws, his amber eyes flicking toward every passerby, as if assessing threats invisible to human sight. Eli Tanner stood nearby, pacing with his camera bag slung over one shoulder. His usual smirk was gone. In its place sat the grim focus of someone who understood that words, once printed, could build or break lives. "You ready?" he asked finally. "No," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "But I don't think readiness matters anymore." "Then let's hope truth does," Eli said. Through the window at the end of the corridor, Daniel caught sight of the snow beginning to fall, soft flakes drifting like ash. He thought of Lila, somewhere in this same building, waiting to speak. The idea of her standing in front of strangers, her small hands trembling, made his chest ache. He had promised himself he wouldn't fail her again. The courtroom was almost full when they entered. Sarah Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in black, her hair styled in neat curls that framed her pale, angular face. The transformation was calculated. Grief polished to performance. Her lawyer, Thomas Kincaid, a man in his early 40s with sleek dark hair and a smile honed for persuasion, leaned close, whispering something that made Sarah nod solemnly. Thomas had a reputation in the region, ruthless, theatrical, and utterly unshakable. Margaret Lacey sat in the row behind them, posture upright, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face betrayed no emotion, but Daniel could sense her unease. She looked like someone who'd followed procedure to the letter, only to realize too late that the letter had no soul. The judge, Honorable Edith Barlow, entered with a quiet dignity. She was a woman in her 60s, short and stocky. Her silver hair pinned back in a simple bun. Her eyes, however, were sharp, blue-gray and cutting, the kind that saw more than people intended to reveal. She tapped her gavel once. "Court is in session." Thomas Kincaid rose first, voice rich and confident. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Sarah Whitmore, stands before you today as a victim of reckless misconduct. Her niece and nephew were unlawfully taken from her home by Officer Harper, without warrant, without authorization, and without cause. She seeks only justice and the safe return of her family." Sarah dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, carefully, gracefully, as though she knew cameras might be watching. Daniel clenched his jaw, but stayed silent. When it was his turn to speak, he stood, his movements measured. "Your Honor," he began, "those children were found in the middle of a snowstorm, alone and freezing. The girl's leg brace was damaged. The boy was sick with fever. Their so-called guardian had locked them out of the house. I didn't kidnap them. I saved their lives. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Thomas smiled thinly. A touching story, Officer Harper. But your word is all we have. My client, meanwhile, has legal documents proving guardianship. And if I may remind the court, this is not the first time Officer Harper has acted outside his authority. Eli stiffened beside Daniel. The reference was deliberate. The Larson case again, dragged out like an old wound. Judge Barlow raised a hand. Mr. Kincaid, keep to the matter at hand. He inclined his head smoothly. Of course, Your Honor. Then came Sarah's testimony. Her voice trembled just enough to sound believable. After my brother's death, I did everything I could to raise his children. It wasn't easy. Grief changes people. But I never stopped caring for them. I didn't know where they were until I saw their faces on the news, taken by a man I didn't even know. She glanced at Daniel, her expression rehearsed sorrow. He made me out to be a monster. Daniel's fists tightened at his sides. Ranger, sensing the tension, gave a low growl before Daniel's quiet hand stilled him. Finally, the judge turned toward the witness door. The court will now hear testimony from Lila Carter. The door opened and a hush fell. Lila entered slowly, her crutch tapping softly against the floor. She wore a simple blue dress and a heavy cardigan, both slightly oversized. Her golden hair had been brushed neatly by Rebecca Hayes, who followed close behind for support. Rebecca looked nervous but encouraging. She had grown fond of the girl in their short time together. When Lila reached the stand, she took a deep breath, her small hands gripping the railing. Her voice was soft but clear. My name is Lila Carter. I'm 10 years old. Judge Barlow gave her a small nod. You understand why you're here, Miss Carter? Yes, ma'am, to tell the truth. And you'll do that? Yes, ma'am. Thomas Kincaid smiled gently, trying to look kind. Lila, he began, I'm very sorry you've had to go through so much, but I want to ask. You said Officer Harper found you outside. Did he ever tell you to lie about your aunt? Lila blinked, confused. No. Did he ever say your aunt was bad? Her brow furrowed. He didn't have to. The courtroom stirred. Thomas's tone sharpened just slightly. What do you mean, dear? Lila lifted her chin. Because she was. She used to make me and Noah sell tickets all day. If we didn't bring back enough money, she wouldn't let us eat. One night, when it rained, she said we weren't worth the food we wasted. She threw us out. Thomas frowned. You're saying your aunt physically expelled you from your home? Yes. The lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, these are serious accusations from a child who's been under emotional strain. But Judge Barlow raised a hand. Let her finish. Lila's voice steadied. When Officer Harper found us, he didn't ask for anything. He just helped. He gave Noah his coat. His dog, Ranger, stayed with us the whole night. He's not a bad man. He's the first person who ever stopped to care. Silence blanketed the room. Even Thomas had no ready words. Sarah's face had lost its color, her mask cracking under the weight of truth spoken without malice. The judge exhaled slowly. Thank you, Miss Carter. You've done very well. Lila nodded, stepping down. As she passed Daniel, she gave a small, brave smile. He wanted to speak, to thank her, but the lump in his throat made it impossible. Ranger's tail thumped quietly against the floor. After deliberation, Judge Barlow returned to the bench. Her tone was firm, final. This court finds insufficient evidence to support the plaintiff's claims. Guardianship of the minors will be transferred to the state pending full review. Furthermore, Officer Harper's actions are deemed justified under emergency protection statutes. Daniel exhaled, his body loosening for the first time in weeks. Across the aisle, Sarah's lawyer whispered urgently to her, but she stared ahead, frozen. As the judge dismissed the court, Lila ran forward, stopping short of Daniel's knees. Does this mean you're not in trouble anymore? She asked. He smiled, kneeling to her level. Not today. Ranger leaned forward, licking her hand, earning a small laugh that melted the last trace of tension in the room. Outside, the snow had begun again, but this time it looked softer, peaceful. Lila lifted her face toward it, eyes shining. It's like the sky's happy too. she whispered. Daniel glanced at the courthouse behind them, then at Ranger. Maybe it finally is. The snow had finally stopped when Daniel drove the children back to Willow Creek. The sky stretched pale and wide above the mountain ridge, the kind of gray that carried neither threat nor promise, just quiet. The storm had passed, but the town felt changed. Maybe it wasn't the town, Daniel thought, but him. The courthouse still echoed in his mind, Lila's voice, steady and small, breaking through walls thicker than laws. He turned the steering wheel toward Birch Hollow Road, the narrow lane that wound up through pine and cedar. The cruiser's tires crunched softly on frozen gravel. Noah was asleep in the back seat, his head tilted against Lila's shoulder. Ranger sat between them, his large frame a warm barrier of safety, his fur gleaming gold under the morning light. Lila watched out the window, eyes wide, taking in every turn as if memorizing it. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "To an old house," Daniel said. "Used to belong to my grandfather. Been empty a long time. Thought we could make it livable again." Lila smiled faintly. "Is it big?" He chuckled. "Big enough for 3 and 1 very large dog." The road ended at a clearing surrounded by pines. There it stood, house number 27, as locals called it. A 2-story farmhouse of faded white wood and slanted shutters, leaning slightly to one side like an old man bracing against time. Its porch sagged, the roof needed patching, and the paint had surrendered to years of weather. Yet, beneath its decay, it held the quiet dignity of something that refused to fall apart completely. Daniel parked near the steps. "It's not much," he said, "but it's safe." Lila stepped out carefully, testing her crutch on the uneven ground. The cold bit at her cheeks, turning them pink. "It smells like trees," she said, smiling. "That's cedar," Daniel replied. "Grandpa used to say it keeps the ghosts away." "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked. He paused. "Only the kind we carry." Inside, the air was stale, but not unfriendly. Dust motes drifted in slanted beams of sunlight, landing on old furniture covered by white sheets. Ranger sniffed the corners, tail wagging as if recognizing something familiar in the silence. The house had belonged to Daniel's grandfather, William Harper, a war veteran who'd raised him after his parents' car accident. The man had been stern but fair, his voice always calm even when life wasn't. It was here Daniel had learned about duty, discipline, and the quiet loneliness that often came with both. The living room still bore traces of him. A worn armchair near the fireplace, a row of books on survival, a faded photo of a younger William in uniform. Daniel brushed dust off the frame, murmuring, "Guess we're back, old man." Lila wandered through the room with a kind of reverence. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He smiled. "You're the first person to say that in 30 years. Ranger barked once, low and approving. Noah stirred awake, blinking sleepily. "Are we home?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, kid, you are." That afternoon, the 3 of them worked together to clear the dust and make the place livable. Lila swept the floors, moving carefully but stubbornly, despite Daniel's protests for her to rest. Noah gathered firewood from the porch, while Ranger followed close, dragging small branches with proud determination. Every time the boy laughed, the dog wagged his tail harder, as if proud of the noise. Inside the kitchen, Daniel found the old stove still intact. He tried it, and, to his surprise, the pilot light flickered alive after years of dormancy. He made a pot of soup, simple, hearty, the way Eleanor used to cook on winter nights. The smell filled the air, warm and grounding. While they ate, Lila asked quietly, "Will we stay here for a long time?" Daniel glanced at her, her eyes reflecting both hope and fear. "As long as you need," he said. Ranger nudged her hand with his nose, earning a soft laugh. "He's saying yes too," she said. After dinner, Daniel climbed up to the attic to fetch blankets. Dust thickened the air, and the floorboards groaned under his boots. In the corner, he found a wooden chest, one he hadn't opened since before Eleanor died. Inside were her things, books she'd loved, an old flannel shirt still faintly smelling of pine soap, and a stack of letters bound by twine. He sat there for a long while, the cold seeping through the boards, the ache of memory soft but persistent. Downstairs, Lila and Noah had settled by the fire. Lila was reading aloud from one of the old books Daniel had given her, a collection of fables. Her voice rose and fell like music, and even Ranger seemed to listen, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. When Daniel came down, she stopped mid-sentence. "Your wife liked stories?" she asked gently. Daniel froze for a moment. "Yeah. She said they helped her believe people could change. Do you believe that too?" He thought of Sarah Whitmore, of her courtroom face, so composed, so false. He thought of himself, of how bitterness had once filled every quiet space after Eleanor's death. "I'm starting to," he said. The next few days passed in small, steady rhythms. They repaired what they could, Daniel fixing the broken stair rail, Lila painting small flowers on the windowsills, Noah chasing Ranger across the yard, until both collapsed in the snow, breathless and laughing. The house began to change, not in structure, but in spirit. Where it had once been hollow, it now carried warmth. A pot always simmering on the stove, muddy boots by the door, laughter echoing up the hallway. One evening, as dusk fell, Eli Tanner stopped by unexpectedly. His breath fogged in the cold, and his coat was speckled with snowflakes melting into the fabric. "Well," he said, looking around, "so this is the infamous house number 27. I was expecting cobwebs and ghosts." Daniel smiled. "Give it time." Eli grinned, handing over a folded newspaper. "Your front page again, this time for the right reasons." Headline reads, "Officer cleared of charges after girl's courageous testimony. Thought you'd want a copy." Daniel took it, glancing at the photo, himself standing outside the courthouse, Lila smiling beside him. "She did that," he said quietly. Eli nodded. "Yeah, but she needed someone to believe in her first." After Eli left, Daniel stood by the window, the newspaper still in his hand. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, endless, forgiving. Lila and Noah were asleep by the fire, Ranger curled protectively between them. The light from the hearth flickered across their faces, painting them in gold and shadow. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to believe that home wasn't a place you returned to. It was something you rebuilt from the ruins. A week after they moved into house number 27, winter began to soften. The sky was no longer the heavy gray of judgment, but a quieter blue, thin and brittle, like porcelain ready to crack into spring. The snow around Willow Creek melted in uneven patches, leaving streaks of brown earth and the scent of thawing pine. Inside the house, warmth had become habitual, firelight flickering every night, the faint hum of an old kettle always on. Daniel Harper stood on the porch that morning, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the road disappear into the mist. Beside him, Ranger sat like a statue, 6 years old now, a broad-shouldered German shepherd with a thick double coat and dark saddle markings that shimmered under sunlight. His amber eyes scanned the tree line, the way a soldier surveys a field, not for fear, but for duty. "Still on patrol?" Daniel murmured. Ranger flicked his ear but didn't move, his tail making one slow sweep across the floorboards. "Good boy," Daniel added. Behind them, laughter broke the still air. Lila and Noah were in the yard, both bundled in mismatched coats. Lila's crutch leaned against the porch rail, unused for the first time that morning. She was taking cautious steps across the uneven ground, her limp still visible but lighter, steadier. Daniel watched her from the porch, an unconscious smile tugging his lips. She had grown stronger since they had arrived, stronger and surer, though her eyes still carried shadows that sometimes rose without warning. "See? Told you I can walk," she called, her breath coming out in little white clouds. Noah clapped, bouncing in the snow. "You're like Ranger, never give up," Ranger barked once, as if to agree, and trotted over to nudge her gently. His muzzle brushed her hand before he bounded off toward the edge of the property, nose to the ground. Daniel's gaze followed him. The dog stopped near the old fence, tail wagging, sniffing something buried half under snow. "What is it, boy?" Daniel called, stepping off the porch. Ranger pawed at the ground, uncovering an old metal lantern. Its glass was cracked, its frame rusted, but when Daniel lifted it, the faintest smell of kerosene lingered. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "This thing's probably older than I am." Lila limped closer, her cheeks pink. "Can we fix it?" Daniel turned it in his hands, considering. "Maybe. Wouldn't hurt to try." That afternoon, the house became a small workshop. Daniel cleaned the rust while Lila and Noah polished the glass, chatting about what color light it might cast when lit. Ranger dozed by the hearth, occasionally lifting his head as if to supervise. As Daniel adjusted the wick mechanism, a folded piece of paper fell out from inside the lantern's base, yellowed and brittle with age. He frowned, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. "To whoever finds this light," it began, "know that it once kept a family safe through the hardest winter Willow Creek ever saw. Let it remind you that warmth can outlast the cold if you tend to it every day." The letter was signed simply, W.H. Lila's eyes widened. "W.H.? That's your grandpa, right?" Daniel nodded slowly. "William Harper. Guess the old man left us more than dust." They fixed the lantern together. When dusk came, Daniel hung it on the porch beam, where the wind could touch but not steal its flame. It glowed faintly at first, a weak amber flicker, then grew steady and golden. The light spilled across the snow, soft and constant. That evening, a knock sounded at the door. Daniel opened it to find Rebecca Hayes, the social worker from Billings. She stood there in her dark wool coat, a leather folder tucked under one arm. Her short brown hair framed a kind but tired face, one that had seen too many broken families and not enough mended ones. "Officer Harper," she said, her breath fogging. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course not, please." Inside, Rebecca glanced around, her eyes softening at the sight of the children building a tower from wooden blocks near the fireplace. "So, this is the famous house number 27, she said with a small smile. "It looks alive again." Lila waved shyly. "Hi, Miss Hayes." "Hi, sweetheart," Rebecca replied. "How's the leg?" "Better. I don't need the crutch all the time anymore." "That's wonderful." Rebecca turned to Daniel, her tone shifting to business. "I wanted to let you know the state finalized the guardianship review. Given the circumstances in your record, the court approved you as their temporary guardian." Daniel blinked. "Temporary?" "For now. 6 months of observation. If everything goes well, it can become permanent." He nodded, quiet relief spreading across his face. "Thank you." Rebecca hesitated, lowering her voice. "I should also tell you, Sarah Whitmore's appeal was denied. She's facing fraud charges now. It's over." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Good." Rebecca studied him for a moment. "You've done a good thing here, officer. Most people would have walked away." "Maybe," he said softly. "But walking away never solved much." She smiled faintly. "Well, keep the lantern burning then." When she left, the house felt warmer. Lila looked up from her blocks. "What did she say?" Daniel crouched down, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She said you're stuck with me." Lila grinned. "Good, you make better soup." Ranger barked in agreement. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch steps with the repaired lantern beside him. The flame inside wavered, but never died. The forest beyond was a black sea, silent except for the rustle of snow sliding off branches. He thought about his grandfather, the man who'd built this house after coming home from war, who'd taught him that love was just another kind of discipline. Maybe, Daniel thought, William had been right. Maybe the house had just been waiting for someone to fill it again. In the morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. Lila stood by the porch rail, hair tangled from sleep, eyes squinting at the bright snow. "It's shining more today," she said, pointing at the lantern. "Maybe it knows we're not leaving," Daniel replied. Noah ran out behind her, clutching a folded newspaper that Eli had left by the gate. "Look, they wrote about us again," he said. The front page headline read, "House number 27, where hope found a home." There was a photo of the lantern glowing against the night, its light reflected in the snow. Lila traced the caption with her finger. "It looks like it's smiling." "Maybe it is," Daniel said. In the weeks that followed, more neighbors began visiting, drawn by stories of the house and the quiet man who'd taken in 2 lost children. One of them was Mrs. Clara Donnelly, an elderly widow who lived down the road. She was small and stooped, with a thick gray braid and a voice like the crackle of dry leaves. She brought pies and advice, both of which she dispensed freely. "That dog of yours," she said on her 3rd visit, "has the soul of a pastor, never seen eyes so wise." Ranger wagged his tail solemnly, as if agreeing to the title. Clara became a regular presence, helping Lila learn to sew, teaching Noah how to plant early spring bulbs in the thawing soil. Under her care, the garden behind house number 27 began to stir again, small shoots pushing through the half-frozen dirt. One evening, as they watched the lantern light sway in the gentle wind, Lila asked, "Do you think the people who walk by see it?" "I hope so," Daniel said. "That's what it's for." She tilted her head. "Then we should never let it go out." He nodded, looking at the girl whose courage had once saved him. "Not ever." And as night descended over Willow Creek, the lantern burned steady, its flame a quiet promise that even in a world where so much is lost, light can still find its way home. By the time spring came to Willow Creek, the hills had traded their snow for wildflowers. The valley filled again with sound, the chatter of robins, the slow hum of thawing streams, the whisper of grass reclaiming what winter had borrowed. House number 27 no longer looked like the place Daniel Harper had first returned to months ago. The porch had been rebuilt, the windows replaced, and the once faded boards now carried a soft honey hue from the new coat of paint. But more than anything, it was alive, truly alive, in a way that only laughter, warmth, and forgiveness could make a place feel so. Daniel stood outside that morning, hammer in hand, fixing the last plank on the garden fence. He was older now, though not by years, by understanding. His eyes still held that watchful calm of a police officer, but there was a softness there, something reclaimed from years of loss. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and the faint scar along his chin caught the sun when he smiled. Ranger sat a few feet away, now a little grayer around the muzzle, but still strong, loyal, and alert. Every so often, he lifted his head to watch Lila and Noah in the yard, the two of them kneeling in the soil, planting seeds Clara Donnelly had brought from her greenhouse. Clara herself sat on a wicker chair near the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her thin shoulders. "Make sure those roots have room to breathe," she called. "Don't strangle them with too much kindness." Her tone was gruff, but her eyes gleamed with affection. Lila giggled. "You sound like Officer Harper." Daniel looked up, mock offended. "Are you calling me old, young lady?" Lila shrugged with exaggerated innocence. "Maybe just a little." Noah burst out laughing, dirt on his nose, and Ranger barked once in solidarity. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. A modest sedan stopped by the gate, and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed neatly in a brown jacket and worn jeans. His hair was blonde streaked with white, his face tanned from years in the sun, with deep lines around his eyes that hinted at both humor and regret. He introduced himself with a quiet, steady voice. "Name's Patrick Doyle. I'm from the county office." Daniel approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Afternoon. What brings you out here?" Patrick smiled faintly. "Nothing bad, I promise. I'm following up on the guardianship review." He glanced toward the children, his expression softening. "Looks like they're doing just fine." "They are?" Daniel said. Patrick flipped open his file, scanning a few notes. "Well, it won't take long. Just need to confirm living conditions, education, community integration. You know, the usual checklist." Rebecca Hayes spoke very highly of this arrangement, by the way. "Rebecca's got a good heart," Daniel replied. "She does," Patrick said, then paused. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Be my guest." Patrick toured the house, his professional demeanor giving way to something warmer as he noted the small details. Lila's drawings pinned on the fridge, the shelf of old police books turned into bedtime stories, the bowl of dog treats labeled Ranger's Paycheck. When he stepped onto the porch again, his tone was less official. "You've built quite a place here, Officer Harper. Or maybe Dad is the right title now." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. Patrick smiled. "The court's decision came through this morning. Guardianship is now permanent." Lila froze mid-laugh, turning toward them. "Permanent?" she echoed. Patrick nodded. "Congratulations. It's official. You're a family." The yard erupted into noise, Noah shouting, Lila crying and laughing at once, Ranger barking excitedly as if understanding every word. Daniel stood motionless for a second before Lila ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "We don't have to leave," she whispered through tears. He shook his head. Not ever again. The afternoon turned into quiet celebration. Clara baked her best apple pie, claiming it was for the occasion, not the officer, though her grin betrayed her fondness. Patrick stayed for coffee and even helped Noah build a birdhouse under Daniel's guidance. The lantern they had repaired months ago still hung above the porch, its glass now polished and its flame steady even in the light wind. Later, when the guests left and the sky began to fade into violet, Daniel sat on the steps, watching the children chase Ranger across the field. He could hear their laughter echo through the trees, blending with the song of the creek. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a stranger. He looked toward the lantern. It glowed faintly in the dusk, just as it had the night they found it. Somewhere deep down, he felt his grandfather's presence, the quiet strength, the lesson left behind. Warmth can outlast the cold if you tend to it every day. The next morning, the town gathered for its annual spring market. Willow Creek's main street was alive with sound, fiddles playing, children running between stalls, vendors shouting about their honey or handmade quilts. Daniel, Lila, and Noah walked together, Ranger trotting proudly ahead on his leash. The children carried a small wooden sign they'd painted themselves. House number 27, Homegrown Jams and Hope. Clara had insisted they sell the jars of wildberry jam she'd taught Lila to make. You don't just rebuild a house, she'd said. You share the light from it. At their stall, townsfolk greeted them with familiarity and warmth. A middle-aged teacher named Mrs. Keaton, with auburn hair and kind eyes behind round glasses, stopped by to tell Lila she'd arranged for her to start school in May. "You're quite the storyteller, young lady," she said. "I heard you've been writing about the lantern." Lila blushed. "It's called The Light That Stayed." Mrs. Keaton smiled. "That's a beautiful title. Keep writing." By noon, all the jam jars were sold. Even the mayor came by to shake Daniel's hand, thanking him for what he'd done for the town's image. "You reminded people that decency still exists," he said. Daniel laughed. "I didn't do it alone." When the market ended, they returned home tired but happy. The evening was warm, the sky streaked with gold and lavender. Lila sat by the porch, scribbling in her small notebook, while Noah and Ranger played fetch in the yard. Daniel brought out the old newspaper clippings and laid them on the table, the headlines that once haunted him. Now they felt distant, like echoes of another man's life. Lila looked up from her writing. "What are you thinking about?" He smiled faintly. "About how sometimes life doesn't give second chances. But people do." She tilted her head. "You think Grandpa Harper knew that when he wrote his letter?" Daniel nodded. "I think he hoped someone would figure it out." The sun sank behind the ridge. Daniel stood and lit the porch lantern. Its glow spread across the yard, soft and golden, reflecting in the children's eyes. The same light that had once guided a lonely officer and two lost souls through a storm now shone steady over their laughter, their home, their future. As the wind rustled through the cedars, Lila wrote her final line in her notebook and read it aloud softly. "Sometimes, the light that saves us doesn't fall from the sky. It's the one someone decides to keep burning." Daniel looked at her, eyes glistening. "You keep that one," he said. "It's yours." She smiled. "It's ours." And under the steady glow of the lantern, house number 27 stood quiet and whole, not a monument to tragedy, but to the small, unshakable mercy of beginning again. In the end, what happened at house number 27 wasn't luck, it was grace. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles as thunder or lightning. He sends them quietly, in the form of a kind man who stops his car in the snow, a brave little girl who refuses to give up, or a loyal dog who never leaves your side. Those moments remind us that faith isn't found only in churches. It's alive in every act of love, in every home where light still burns despite the storm. So, tonight as you finish this story, take a moment to thank God for the small miracles in your own life, for the people who stayed, for the hands that lifted you up, for the light that never went out. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment Amen below to bless this message, and don't forget to subscribe so more hearts can find their way back to faith, love, and the quiet miracles that still happen every day. God bless you.